This special work session for August 6th to order.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'll entertain a motion for the approval of tonight's agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion is carried. For our regular agenda, we have one item on the docket tonight. It's 4 Alpha, the Mediacom franchise fee agreement discussion. Mr. City Administrator.
Mayor Haig, members of the City Council, today we have our City Attorney present, and then we also have our contracted attorney Brian Grogan here to answer questions about the Mediacom franchise agreement. Councilmember Newell Krogman had sent out a series of questions that I have forwarded on to Council to be kind of drive the discussion today. So with that, I'll just pull up those questions on the monitor for us to all see, and then we'll go through the process, and it'll essentially be a Q&A with Mr. Grogan. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brian.
Mayor Haig, members of the council, Brian Grogan with Moss and Barnett, happy to be here this
Welcome, Brian. Thanks for being here tonight.
evening. Enjoyed working with your city attorney and city administrator to try to get this deal done. Thank you. I think we have a very good contract in place. You know, we didn't achieve every goal that we had hoped for, but that's the nature of negotiations. There was some give and take. But I have had an opportunity to look through this list, and certainly will do my best to try to respond to these questions. Mayor, would you prefer if I just walk through these, or would you like to direct them to me?
No, please.
Brian, if I could, the microphone, if you could pull it a little closer,
Yeah.
pull it off to the side.
There you go. Perfect.
We'll get comments on Facebook and things like that if
Gotcha.
we're not talking into them. So
This is a very comprehensive list of questions, and I think it represents each of us individually, and I want to applaud Councilmember Krogman for taking the time to compile this for all of our benefits. Thank you, Councilmember Krogman.
You're welcome. Let me be clear. I did it on my own. It was not, we didn't have any kind of meetings
That's
to do
correct.
this. It was my
That is correct.
list.
So that everyone knows, this is the first time I'm seeing that. As of 9:30 this morning when I left to go to the building, I still hadn't gotten this email.
And of course, it was addressed to you, if I recall correctly. Maybe not. It should have been.
if I may, we can talk about this after the meeting. I think we figured out what was going on. So.
Very good. Well, Mayor, let me start with question number one, which is why do we need this agreement? Both under federal law and state law, we have an obligation in Minnesota. You can't provide cable television service without a valid franchise agreement. So Mediacom has a franchise in place today that was granted in 2001. It ran for 15 years. This council has approved some short-term extensions while we tried to get this renewal completed. But ultimately, Mediacom isn't permitted to continue in business if they don't have a valid franchise. So that's the purpose of the agreement. Now, it doesn't have to be as long as this. Some are longer, some are shorter, but there has to be a franchise.
Question, in regard, you said this requirement by state and federal law pertaining to the cable industry.
Correct.
So any of the cable competitors that you would have in Sueur, are they required then as well to go ahead and provide a franchise fee to the city? And what about the Dish and Direct people that are doing satellite? Is that
Sure.
applicable to them as well?
Sure. Very good questions. And actually, in answering those, we'll take 3 of them off the list, which is great. So let's start with anybody else who is providing cable service via a satellite. So that's Dish and Direct TV. Those are the common ones we know. Since they're not utilizing your public right-of-way, they're not required to get a franchise by law. So therefore, no franchise fee. People who have the dish on top of their house, city gets has no ability to impose any obligations. You can't force your local programming on that service either. If you have DirecTV, you certainly don't notice any local community programming. It's the DirecTV package. As it relates to any local competitor, Jaguar Communications, for example, was labeled in this list of questions. To the extent they are providing wired cable service, I want to make sure we're clear on this. If they provide a service that is the same as Mediacom, traditional cable TV that we think of, they're required by state law to have a franchise. It's not the city's fault if they're out there doing it without a franchise, but they're technically in violation of the law. It's Minnesota Statute 238. So if that's occurring, and that would be new knowledge to me. I don't have any specific knowledge that they are or are not providing that. But anybody, if Centurylink wanted to provide a video product, they would have to come and get a franchise. I know for a fact Centurylink is out reselling DirecTV. So if you call them and you say, I'd like to buy video, they will basically serve as a sales force for DirecTV. But again, because it's a wireless product, they need a franchise. Did I adequately answer your question, Mayor?
Yes, sir, thank you.
When you say a video product, doesn't that, because if you have just internet, you're getting Netflix and other through that internet, isn't that the same?
Great question. The answer is no. It certainly looks and feels the same. The distinction is you can get any of those. Let's use Netflix as the common example, or it could be YouTube or Hulu. All those kind of options are out there. You can get those anywhere off of any network, correct? You could get it wirelessly. You can get it whether you're a Centurylink customer, a Mediacom customer. You can get them if you live in Washington State. What distinguishes it is if you are providing a cable service that is only available to those utilizing your system. That's the way our statute is drafted. So you are placing facilities in the city's rights of way, and the only people that can buy that video is not over the web, what we would call over the top, but rather discreetly through your network. That is what triggers the franchise obligation. And maybe just a natural segue, although we're going to come to this question, is what's the concept of a franchise fee? Why do we have one? What's the purpose of it? We did have a franchise fee and do today under our existing 2001 contract. So this contract does not raise the franchise fee. It changes the definition of gross revenues, and I'll explain that in a minute, but you're not modifying your franchise fee. It's simply continuing forward a 5% fee. So let's take this in pieces. First of all, you're only allowed to get a franchise fee on cable or video services. You cannot get it on telephone and on broadband services or internet services. And those are the three things, of course, that you buy from these companies is voice, video, and data. You triple play it and you, whatever the price, $150 for all three. Only that portion that's attributable to cable TV is what we get the fee on. In fact, the law changed a year after your 2001 contract, stating that cities could not obtain a franchise fee on broadband services. Back then, it was kind of a fledgling industry. It's changed a little bit since then. Now broadband is, that's where every one of these companies makes their money because there's no programming cost for broadband. You just buy in a pipe, right? So the margins are wonderful on the broadband side. Punchline is we legally can't get a franchise fee on broadband or on telecom. The only thing we can get a fee on is the cable. Now, why would you charge on cable? First of all, you have a legal right to do it. Doesn't mean you have to, but you have a legal right to do it. Historically, in this city, as in, I'm going to ballpark here, 95% of Minnesota cities all charge a franchise fee on cable. It could be just historically that's what they've done. I guess I'm not going to question what the various city councils believe on that kind of issue, but sometimes people mistake a franchise fee and they say it is a tax. Technically, under the law, a franchise fee in the cable world is a rental fee for the operator's use of your streets, your alleys, your sidewalks, everything that they can install their facilities on. So it is, the law is crystal clear that it is a rental fee for the use of the streets. However, the law also says that the operator has the right to put it as a line item on subscribers' bills. So it certainly looks and feels when you pick up your bill, sales tax, franchise fee, total amount, it certainly feels as though it comes across as a tax. That's not legally what the law says it is, but I can certainly appreciate if the council wants to debate that issue. It's a policy issue, and happy to have input as you'd like on
Brian,
that.
if I may interrupt, here's a bill, it's on there, listed as franchise fee for
Yes.
MediaCom.
Yes, as I said, it's listed, the bill, the sales tax, franchise fee, total amount. So it certainly looks and feels just like a consumer tax, as if it was a sales tax. But that's because the law, federal law, says they can line item it out. And if you're in their shoes, they of course want to deflect as much of that bill as they can on some third party, FCC, state, city. Nothing says you have to charge that fee, but all I'm stating is if you said, well, what's the purpose of it? There's case law and statutory sites I can give you that it was drafted by Congress as a rental fee for the use of your streets. And the reason they did that, if you really want to think about the history of this, it used to be we were in a world where telecommunications, your phone bill was actually set by the Public Utilities Commission. I think everybody around the table here is old enough to, maybe not you, but all of us are old enough to remember that the phone bill used to be set by the PUC, and you couldn't charge more. Cable never had that. Cable was always able to charge whatever they wanted. So for the PUC, you can't charge a franchise fee on a telephone company because they had historically gotten a regulated rate of return. It didn't make a lot of sense. Here you had a private company coming in using a public asset to generate a profit. And so Congress said, well, it's only fair. If somebody came in and wanted to develop on your public park, you'd have a right to charge them a fee for the use of the public park to put up a Walmart store. Similar here, you can charge that. Again, from a policy standpoint, though, you don't have to. We continued exactly what the city's been doing since 2001 in this franchise. I mentioned a moment ago the definition of gross revenues. My job when I write one of these contracts is to maximize, at least the way I view it, maximize as much of their revenue subject to that franchise fee that I can put in a contract. So I looked at your 2001 definition, and what I tried to do is make this definition as expansive as I could so that your franchise fee would touch as many different cable services as possible. Things have changed, now the company is providing on-demand, digital, pay-per-view, all kinds of things. We wanted to clarify that so that all those things would be subject to the franchise fee. Again, we don't have to do that, but what I viewed my job to be here is to put you in the best possible position as a city. If we want to back away from any of these, we will not find an unwilling audience with MediaCom. They would be happy to see those drop. So that's a policy call for the city. Let's see. I think we've covered, and please stop me if I'm wrong. Oh, well, let's start. We've covered many of these questions, but number 2 says, what benefit does this contract bring the city? Well, it checks the box on our statutory obligation, number 1. It does provide, I think, a number of benefits. It provides you continuation of your local cable channel. It provides funding for that channel. We've talked about the franchise fee. It includes customer service obligations, so that if you have a customer who cracked driveway, failure to be able to get through on the phone, company won't be responsive with poor signal quality. We have all of those issues covered here with 4 pages of regulations, none of which you have to get active doing anything about, but if you need it, which is kind of the purpose of all contracts. You hope you never have to use a contract, but if something goes wrong, it's covered there. City would have the ability to exercise authority and utilize that. So I do think it has several benefits in that sense. What benefit does it bring to the city's residents who are MediaCom customers? I'd say for them, it gives the city, again, customer service enforcement. We also put in here, though, liquidated damages, performance bonds, security funds, so that the resident basically has you as their spokesperson with the ability to hold a stick and say, MediaCom, comply with these obligations or you're going to be subject to liquidated damages, a draw from your performance fund, or ultimately termination if you fail to comply. So I think that's a benefit. I view that contract as ultimately providing the protection for the city and the residents.
I think, sir, another benefit would be the cable access television
Yes.
as well for the customers.
Absolutely. And this morphs a little bit into policy, but I've been around enough cities over the state that I guess I feel like I can say the pros and the cons. Some folks would say, we live in a world where we can go out on YouTube and we've all got phones and we can communicate so easily. Why do we need an old school cable channel? Let's do away with that. Let's not have any local programming. Others would say, gosh, the amount of coverage we get on Sueur, where we're located, we get overwhelmed by Minneapolis news. Nobody covers things that are important to our city. There's no way for a senior citizen here to get that kind of information. But with a city-owned channel where you control the content, you can communicate directly to your constituents. Many cities look at that and say, that's very important. So,
Thank you.
All right, I think, let's see, number 4, I think we've answered with respect to it does not apply for internet and phone services, only to cable. How much annual income would the city get from a 5% franchise fee? Ballpark, just going to ballpark, at about $40,000 a year is what the franchise fee will generate. So over this 10-year franchise, $400,000. Now, it came up earlier talking with Jasper just prior to the meeting. What should we think about in terms of will that fee go up or down for revenue generation for the city? It's not lost on you folks, I'm sure, that more and more people are cutting the cord, right? They're saying, I don't want to pay Mediacom, I want to just buy Netflix and not deal with it. Truth is, they'll still end up paying Mediacom for their broadband service because you still need internet in order to buy those things. But when they do that, your fee revenue goes down. I would anticipate that 40,000 is the high water mark. I don't think you're going to look at any increase in that. I think as customers drop, your franchise fees could well drop. It's a question of will they continue just a steady downfall, or will we hit a stabilization point where everybody who's going to cord cuts, and those of us who want to stay on cable TV stay. And I don't know, that's the future. We'll have to just guess and see where that's going to take us.
That 40,000 based on a total of $800,000, right?
It would be, so 95% of that money, right? So you'd say the cable operator, your math's probably a little quicker than mine, but if they generate $800,000 of revenue and there's a 5% fee, that's where you get the 40,000.
I thought you mentioned 400,000. I didn't get what that was.
So the 400,000 is my simple math of saying it's 40,000 a year. There's a 10-year contract. So if you wanted to say, what does this kind of represent? In the neighborhood of 400.
I don't know if anybody is aware of it, but as of May this year, Mediacom, to all of their businesses, they changed their contracts and they changed their service. You can no longer get just internet for Mediacom. You have to get internet, phone, and cable television. So no matter what, if you're a business and that's what you're going to have to go through Mediacom, and Mediacom really is throughout the city, I've had to look at it in 2 different pieces of property. And for me, Jaguar's too far away, and so it's consolidated. I have to go with Mediacom. But for me to go with Mediacom, what I was paying $95.94 a month for is now $200. No matter what, and I have to have all 3. So I think that as we're looking at the idea that maybe those franchise fees are going to go away, it might be that their customers, because it costs so much money to get the other products to your house at this point, if they're able to do this as far as the businesses go, why wouldn't they do this for their regular customers too?
And that's a trend line we see in the industry. Comcast, for example, in the Twin Cities market, recently said, if you buy cable along with your internet, we'll double your internet speed for free. So if you're a 40 meg a month, we'll put you to 80 or 100 meg, no extra cost. It's a nice little carrot hanging out there, and it tends to make people say, okay, I'll spend a little extra there because I want the faster speed. In the industry, like anything, they call it sticky. They want to try to make their products as sticky as possible so they don't have cord cutters, so they don't lose you as a customer as a whole. And every company is trying a variety of ways to retain those subscribers. Next question shifts to the PEG fee. And just so we're all clear, the franchise fee almost universally in Minnesota, I see a franchise fee typically at 5% level. 5% is the cap that the federal law allows, so you couldn't charge more if you wanted. PEG fee varies more. You'll see a different PEG fee all over the place. So the PEG fee in this case is set at 85 cents per subscriber per month. You'll see fees that are higher, you'll see fees that are lower, and there certainly are cities that charge zero for PEG fee because they just don't have any local channels to program, or they don't have any expenses, so it's a moot point for them. That is a completely negotiated item. It was one of the more hotly negotiated items in this document. You might say, well, what did we do in 2001? What's been the scenario for the last 15 years? Back in 2001, they gave you 2 grants in the amount of $20,000 apiece to help fund the equipment that you have. Now, that's actually a pretty inexpensive deal when you consider it's 2 $20,000 grants for a 15-year franchise. That equates to a relatively minor amount of money for the city to use. What we tried to do is make sure that the money we were putting in here, this will generate, in our estimation, you look at it and you say we've got about 600-700 customers, guessing, at 85 cents a piece. So you multiply that by per month, you're looking at $6,000-7,000, give or take. Maybe it's a little bit more. That money then is designated. You can't use that in your general revenue account. You can't use that for fire trucks or anything else. It is designated for equipment facilities to support the local channels. The contract is written so that if you don't want that anymore, if 5 years from now you've stockpiled a bunch of money and you say, I don't want that fee anymore, you can certainly reduce that fee. But bear in mind that if you were to reduce it now, which is certainly your right, there's nothing in the contract that says you can increase it over the next 10 years. So it's kind of like you get a bite at the apple. And that's fairly common in these contracts. You negotiate it now, and again, you look at it in terms of meeting your long-term needs over 10 years. Everything you have in here will fail twice in that 10-year term because it gets used a lot, and it's commercial grade, and that's just the useful lifespan of that equipment. The goal was to make sure that the people who would benefit from this, which are the cable customers, would actually be the ones financing it, as opposed to taking money out of the city's general revenue fund, where people who maybe buy DirecTV are funding it, but they don't actually get the benefit of seeing the program. So, any questions on those issues? Because those are complicated fee issues.
Well, to be clear, if you're 85 cents a month per person, per customer, I think is the term, subscriber,
Correct.
I think is the fancy term. If you had 700 customers, that's not 6,000 to 7,000 a month.
That's a year.
That's right.
Yeah, $7K a year.
Oh, if I misspoke, I'm sorry,
just to
Councilmember.
everybody be clear. I mean, you're not
absolutely.
talking.
I was trying to do the math in my head on the fly, so the math is, let's just say 700 times 85 cents, that's 1 month, times
Right.
12 months, that gets you the number, so you're
That's right.
absolutely correct.
So, are we gonna talk, the next question is what the PEG funding be used? Is that, even if we got $7,000 off of that 85 cents a month, is that enough to pay for a person for a whole year to be in charge of programming?
Before we get into that debate, let me clarify that the law says we can require this for capital costs. So, equipment, wires, facilities, anything with a depreciable life. We're not allowed to use it for warm
Personnel,
bodies,
exactly.
personnel, anything that's operating. And I know that's probably a little...
Even for PEG?
Unfortunately, yes. And the theory behind that one, more information you guys probably want to know, but the theory behind it was the law is structured so that they expected you to be spending a little bit of your franchise fee revenue on the operating side of it. So the company could be on the hook for the capital piece, but city would have to then put a little skin in the game on the operating side. Some cities have multiple employees, they're larger, they have greater resources, and they do a very robust programming. Other cities, their primary stuff is, school board meetings, city council meetings, work sessions, those things. So there's a great variety of effort put into these.
Brian, who manages that fund or actually has fiduciary responsibility? Is that the cable company that keeps that PEG money because it's capital, or does it go to the city and we have a restricted account?
You do. It would come straight to the city, paid quarterly, just like the franchise fee, but in a separate check. And so then they'll say, this is your PEG fee. The city's obligation, however you want to account for it, is to put a designated fund together, and then at least if you were ever called to the mat, you could demonstrate,
Right.
hey, we collected 70 grand over these many years, now here's what we're going to do with it.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, let's see if we have a dedicated local, who would manage it? I think that was the question. That's probably a bigger discussion in terms of whether Jasper gets to manage it or how you're going to delegate the obligation to do that. For a city your size, you typically wouldn't have a designated employee. It would be commingled with someone else's job responsibilities, and they would spend a percentage of their time, whatever the council determines, 10, 20, 50% of their time would go to this aspect of it. Some cities more into it, and some cities are not. It just depends on what your council wants to do. Who pays the franchise fee? The company providing the service or the consumer? We talked about this a little bit, but as the law says, it is a fee on the company. So the company is required to pay it. Unfortunately, the law says they get to line item out of the scriber bill, so it certainly looks as if the city is imposing a straight tax on the customer. And I appreciate that. It's not technically what the law says it is, but there is the appearance and then there's the reality. And that's where I think we talked about that at the beginning.
But since the city has discretion to impose it or not, then it does, I mean, if the cable, if it was their choice, they wouldn't have it, right?
Correct.
But if it's there, it's because the city put it there.
That's absolutely right.
Okay.
Yep. And, I mean, I guess I could say, I don't want to be an advocate for any one position here, but if you charged me $5,000 for a liquor license, just for argument's sake, I suppose what I could do is every time you buy a beer, I could say 5 cents of this beer goes to the city to pay off my liquor license. Go thank your council members for that one. I could do that. It's just, I don't do that, right? Here, because it's a recurring fee year after year, why wouldn't you do that if you're the company? You're going to try to show that this isn't, I'm not the one charging this extra money for the bill, it's the city. And that's what they all do. Are there franchise fees associated with Centurylink Services within the city? So Centurylink provides telephone and broadband. They do not provide a wired cable product. So there are no franchise fees because we can't go after the broadband. And on telecommunications, we don't have a franchise with them for their telecom services. Same question with respect to Jaguar. To the best of my knowledge, Jaguar also is providing a broadband or data service. So no, we do not charge a franchise fee. As we mentioned, DirecTV and Dish are both satellite companies. They don't impose any burden on the right-of-way, so there are no fees there that we can legally go after them for. What were the costs to get this draft franchise agreement? So I did a little research trying to make sure I could come prepared to answer that question. My law firm, me in particular, we were approved with an engagement agreement by the council back in November of 2016. I don't know who was on the council, but whoever was in 2016 approved hiring us. I know that was under your prior city administrator, Janelle, or is it Janelle?
Janelle.
So that was just prior to her departing in January of 2017. So maybe that's a later question, is who decided to hire outside counsel. So this council approved that. We then immediately went in to get an extension so that we could extend the 2001 contract, and we've been negotiating since. I believe the costs that I pulled from my accounting group are somewhere near $25,000 that the city has paid over the last 2+ years on this. So clearly more than I think anyone anticipated. I will say that we've been trying to keep the city's team up to date with emails and other information. City attorney has been pretty prompt about making sure that the council was given updates on all of it. We have a dance partner here in MediaCom, and they took positions that, at least from your city's team and from my recommendation, weren't acceptable, and we were pushing them to try to get them to an acceptable position. We had delays because in some cases I was trying to go to school on a deal that I was doing in Granite Falls, or in Marshall or in Pipestone, so that I wouldn't have to do the heavy lifting for Sueur. I could leverage the deal that I was cutting there and try to make sure I could use the same language. Did some of that, but in the end, it took longer than we had hoped.
Question, Brian. You had indicated initially that this is mandated by both state and federal law, the franchise fee. Now, that said, even though the agreement expired in December of 2016, this franchise fee money has been collected.
Correct.
So there is a pool of money that has been collected since January of 2017, where I'm assuming the legal bills were paid out of that collected franchise fee money.
Not directly. The franchise fee money goes into the general fund. The general fund, a different account paid for the legal services. So not a direct one-to-one, but yes, I would say that that's safe to say.
So theoretically, at this point then, if my math is correct, we've accumulated somewhere around $60-some thousand then since January of 2017, $40,000 for 2017 and half of that for, well, we're now, in the 8th month of 2018, so probably closer to 70,000 at this point,
I would agree, Mayor.
plus the PEG.
But if I understand correctly, we've been getting those payments all along. It's not held in escrow somewhere.
Right.
It's not like we're going to get a bonus here all of a sudden.
Right.
It's just been
Exactly.
part of our living.
Exactly.
And to be clear,
I just
let's-
wanted to make sure it wasn't terminated, that the
Correct.
public understood that it's not been terminated because of the franchise agreement terminated back in December of 2016.
That's correct.
But we weren't getting PEG, right? We were just getting the 5%.
That's correct. I'm going to try to I think we have 3 questions, but let me try to catch up with them. So actually, every one of you is correct on what you've stated. The PEG fee was not, because under the 2001 agreement, it was two $20,000 payments. They had already made those. So one reason why, to the extent you want to start collecting that fee, that we would approve this, is it would immediately then kick in the PEG fee, if you're in agreement with that. The franchise fee was going to continue because the way it works, the law is, you don't get all the benefit of being able to provide cable service in the city's streets without also the burden of having to pay the compensation required. You did some short-term extensions starting in January of 2017 of that 2001 contract. I actually think we're in a carryover phase now, but to the extent this doesn't pass, what I would recommend then is we do another short-term extension of the 2001 deal, just so we have it crystal clear, and then we would go back and fix whatever you don't like out of this deal. If this deal passes, it supersedes the 2001 deal. This is our new agreement, and we run with it for the next 10 years.
I guess I don't understand what you mean when you say if it doesn't pass. Doesn't sound like we have much choice. It's mandated by state and federal law.
It is, Mayor, but certainly I work for you, your administrative team works for you. If we get something wrong in a contract and the council says, I like 90% of it, but change these 3 things.
Oh, sure.
I'll
Okay.
go back and I'll change the 3 things.
But the point is, we still have to have a franchise agreement, and we must go ahead and collect that monies. We may have to change some of the language to do so, but
Yep.
this is something we're going to have to live with forever.
For the next 10 years, correct. And as it's drafted now, you have the 5% fee, you have all the things we've talked about. If you desire a change, then let me know, and we'll work on it, and we'll make sure that that's changed. Nothing in here, I will say this, is novel in the sense that this is, the commitments that we've included here are in keeping with most of the franchises that you would see. If you'd pull a new franchise, the hard part here was we were trying to, tie it together to your city code and some other things, but there is nothing in here that would say, well, Sueur is somehow treating Mediacom differently than other cities. So I want to be clear about that. Your PEG fee is in line with what Mediacom is paying in other cities as well. All right, who authorized the expenditure? I think that was the November 2016 engagement agreement. Was there a cap? I looked at the engagement agreement. There wasn't a cap, except that to start, Janelle and then Jasper, city attorney, everyone, the agreement is drafted such that if you're not satisfied with my services, you terminate me. If you want to continue forward, then we continue to work forward. So there wasn't any price cap in there. Was there an estimate on how much it would cost? I did look at the email exchanges. I did not see any dollar estimate that was ever exchanged. I certainly can say, though, my recollection of the initial dialogue with Janelle was we did not expect that we would be here in August of 2018. The expectation was that we would have this done somewhere in mid to late 2017. That didn't happen, so therefore the costs are higher than we anticipated, but that was never the expectation going in. The thought was that we would be able to get a deal rather quickly.
Brian, if I may, it strikes me that what you told us effectively is if we decide not to give Mediacom a franchise agreement, they're out of business in Sueur. We just tell our citizens, go find other services. I'm not saying I want to do that, that's what I'm hearing.
Well, you have the legal right. It's a little more complicated than that. I didn't get into the details of that. But I can try to answer it in a couple minutes. But I understand your point. Clearly, this council ultimately decides who does business in town and under what terms. The federal law gives the cable operator a fair amount of protection on renewals. And their theory is, look, these companies come in and they build this infrastructure all over town. We don't want cities to be able to pull the carpet out from under them every 5 or 10 years and have a new company have to rebuild. So what they've done is they've said, unless the operator has a proven record of noncompliance, lacks the requisite qualifications, or fails to meet the city's future needs and interests, then they're entitled to renewal. Now, the question is under what kind of contract? So our game here was never in an effort to try to kick Mediacom out or put them in a position where they wouldn't provide service. It was to try to get them to agree to meet our needs and interests.
Do we have any additional questions for Brian?
Brian, it strikes me that if we wanted to reduce the rate from 5 to 2%, which is obviously one of the questions we had in this list.
Sorry if I missed that.
We could also simply eliminate the PEG fee, couldn't we? Because we could just set it at 2, 2.5, 3, whatever we wanted. You wouldn't have to have a PEG. Because you're capped at 5 for a franchise fee. Just make it a flat franchise fee and get rid of this PEG.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You would have complete discretion because you're at the top at the 5% right now. Anything that we would go back to Mediacom and say, would you be willing to agree to a lower amount? Obviously they will, because that only relieves pressure for them in terms of their rates. Now, Councilmember, one thing I want to caution is there is a school of thought out there that says, and I'm just going to say that, let's assume an average customer in Sueur will pay $80 a month for cable TV. Remember, this isn't rate regulated, so they can pick any rate. But they're going to pick the rate at the highest. That's the trick. They have to pick the rate at the highest level that a customer is willing to pay before the customer says, enough's enough, I can't afford it anymore. So if right now that fee is, I cannot go over $80, part of that is the franchise fee. So if you reduce it, do you open up a window where that just gets filled with a cost increase, and where does that money go? That's all speculative. None of that you can bank on. I just throw it out there for consideration because there have been some who have argued, look, if I wipe away the franchise fee and wipe away the PEG fee, I'm now reducing my residents' bills. I'm doing a good thing for society here. The worry that I have is if you do that, does that space get filled up with a price increase that doesn't go to the city? I don't know, and I'm not suggesting that Mediacom would do that. I'm saying, though, that folks have pondered those questions and said it's funny how all the cable pricing on a total seems to rise to the highest level possible before we all get so frustrated we disconnect.
And if I may, as you say that, I would observe that a PEG fee will remain the same, whatever we set it at. So if a person reduces their service, gets fewer channels of cable, we still at least have that revenue source for that purpose, for the public educational.
In terms
Whatever.
of if you maintain the franchise fee
Correct.
but took away the PEG fee.
No, if we kept the PEG fee, okay, if we keep that, if a customer reduces their service level and pays less to Mediacom, the percentage we get, whatever we fix it at, we're going to get less income because they've reduced their service of cable, but we always would, if we keep the PEG fee, we have a consistent source of income for that public service.
Because it's 85 cents.
Because it's 85 or $1 or whatever we set it at.
Can I play devil's advocate
Yeah.
for just a second? So let's assume that the trend line that we see today, though, of 700 customers is going to slowly drop. All right, so over the next few years, it's going to go down to 600 customers. Cable rates are still going to go up, right? That's one of God's rules, that cable rates, along with the price of gas, are going to go up, right? Or something like that. So by pinning your franchise fee to gross revenues, even though you might have a slight trickle down on your subscribers, because the rates are going up, your revenue actually could stay neutral. When you lose a subscriber, though, you immediately lose 85 cents every customer that drops. So the trend line is actually to try to even take the PEG fee and make it into a percentage of gross, because it has greater stability. Now, you and I are talking very subtle differences here. What's clear is this council can do anything it chooses on both the PEG fee and the franchise fee, and we can make that change. We've put you in a position where you're at the high water mark now. If you want to drop down, that is very easy to accomplish. As a matter of fact, we could accomplish it before your next council agenda goes out, because the operator is going to accept a reduction in their fee obligations, clearly.
I still see, on a business stance, Mediacom's the only game in town that actually has cable in this town. And they're running cable and internet and telephone. To maintain their customers, I'll tell you now, I had a quote from Mediacom for $8,000. They wanted $8,000 a month for fiber optic 5 years ago. And I'm getting fiber optic now for $500 through another supplier. So they're not able to compete when it comes to internet base. But cable, they're the only thing they have in town. And because they run cable and they're not running the fiber optic like that, I don't see where they're not going to be bundling for homeowners. If you want internet from us, you're going to get cable television, and we're going to do this, this, and this, and that's what you're going to wind up getting. I have a hard time believing that business-wise, they're going to let that go. I have a hard time believing that the revenue would actually drop. I'm more inclined to think that because they're only game in town for that they're going to capitalize on being the only ones.
Question for you in regards to the bundling. What is the math, if you know, on how bundling actually works? Is it a strict third, and third for telecom, ISP, and for the cable? Or is there a magic formula that we're aware of? Because the franchise fee is only being paid on that portion of, let's say, $100 a month bundled fee that represents the cable. And my second question would be, do you see any changes in the law, both at the state level or at the federal level, that would have anything to do with the telecom industry or the ISPs, the internet service providers in the future?
Okay.
That would bring in something like franchise fees like we're dealing with now with cable.
Sure. So first question, bundled services. We actually anticipated that question. It might be that Jasper heard that question from you, Mayor, earlier, because one of the things we built into this contract was language that said they cannot allocate their revenue disproportionately to telephone and broadband so as to lower their franchise fees. So we have protection language in there that says if you charge $150, you cannot disproportionately provide the discount any greater on cable than on anything else. It has to be fair and even across the board. So, we pinned that in the contract, so hopefully we've solved that issue. The second question that you have is a hot issue right now. I think, let me sum it up by saying, is anything going to change in the telecom laws that could affect any of this? Absolutely, there will be changes. Just last year, the cell providers, AT&T and the folks who provide us our phone service, got a bill through the state legislature that allows them to attach to your local light poles at cost and really use it to deploy their small cell service. With that change, we can expect other industries to say, I kind of like free use of public property too. And I would expect that you're going to see a lot. The league did the best they could to protect municipal interests on that. They were up against pretty tough lobbying on that. At the federal level, right now, the FCC has this strange perception that cities somehow are a barrier to entry, particularly for broadband services. And it's illogical to me because that stands then to reason that somehow the elected officials of Sueur don't want good broadband service in their community, which is the exact opposite of what your city and every other city in America wants. You want good broadband. You're doing everything you can to increase broadband. It's like today's modern freeways, right? If you don't have it, you're in trouble. But the FCC has this theory that cities are bad guys, and so they are adopting regulation after regulation to really take away your right-of-way control and let folks do almost anything they choose in that right-of-way. Put up facilities, put up backup generators, dig on streets that have just been repaved. So these things are going to happen right now because right now the easy scapegoat is to say it's the city's fault. Let's just make it so the industry can do as they please. Most of the industry, fortunately, are good players. Mediacom is a good player. They want to follow the city code, but I fear that the laws are going to change. And where you have to worry is when you get a bad player in town, a player that's coming by just on spec, trying to make a quick dollar, and they don't play by the same rules. They work with subcontractors that aren't very good. Next thing you know, you have problems with your city, streets that are damaged, and no money to repair it. I'm working with many of my clients up in the Twin Cities to try to send letters to the FCC to say, wait, just think about this for a minute before you take all the control away from cities. Cities have been doing this for a long time. They're pretty good at it. You may want to leave the cities in control of this stuff.
So if something does come up legislation-wise and so forth that impacts on this agreement in some ways, there's some clause in here that says that we both parties can respond and negotiate that change?
We have two different provisions. One is a state statutory requirement that says any change in law the parties will become compliant with within so many days of the effective date of the law. So the contract covers it that way because the statute says we have to. We also have a severability clause in here that if something were to be found to be unlawful or unenforceable by an agency or a court, then that basically gets stricken from the agreement, but the bulk of the agreement stays. So severability clauses are fairly typical in contracts that are, of any length, and that kind of a provision would cover what you're talking about. If the state changes something and takes away our ability to, heaven forbid, to do customer service, that would get severed, and the bulk of the contract would remain, though.
So we have the flexibility to adapt to change.
Correct.
In regard to this.
Yeah, the best we can. Now, if there's a wholesale game change where the feds have just completely blown up the franchise model and done something different, then it's just going to require that the parties sit down and try to determine what's left of this contract that remains reasonable. Hard to anticipate that, though, when you draft a contract like this. So far, the federal law hasn't really changed all that much since 1984. So we've got, 30 plus years in with this existing law. That's 2 or 3 versions of your franchise that have gone through this law. It could happen again. I would say that Congress is going to have to, they don't seem to be able to agree on much right now. They're going to have to figure out a way to agree on some things if they're going to try to redo the Telecom Act, because there's so much money at stake, so many different parties at play, that they're really going to have their game together in order to keep, Comcast and Time Warner and Cox and Charter and Mediacom and Verizon and AT&T. They're all going to have a game in that. If we thought healthcare was hard, telecom's going to be that hard,
Can I just ask a question? This may not be in your bailiwick as far as experience, but it seems to me that the franchise fee and the FEG fee, those fees are there for us to cover our costs of providing the local channel, which is the benefit we see for the community. Is that naive, or are we going to have to? Do most cities subsidize the program through expenses above and beyond what they can collect with the fees?
So generally, what I'll say is every city that has a channel that they actively program, a government channel that they actively program, or a community channel, they almost all impose a PEG fee. It can vary. Some PEG fees are actually over $2. Some PEG fees are as low as 30, 40 cents. Usually it has to do with the size of the city. You know, if you're Rochester and you've got 25,000 customers, 40 cents goes a long way. If you're a smaller community, it doesn't add up as quick. So some of that is variable. Rarely do I see someone not have a PEG fee if they have an active channel. Where I don't see a PEG fee is when they don't really use the channel. They just do a character-generated thing, maybe a couple of city announcements. It's almost like a PowerPoint. And they just have an assistant in town loaded up. It's not expensive to do that, so there they probably don't impose the local fee because it's just, they're not using it much.
I guess what I was getting at is, with 700 customers, we can pretty much project what our maximum is going to be. But from my perspective, I'm wondering if that's enough to cover someone like we had before that did the programming and we had to replace equipment and so forth. And so are we to look at this, do most cities look at this as a combination of covering some of their costs, but also a responsibility to provide a service to those in the community that select to join, much like the community center? Our fees for the community center don't cover all of our expenses, but we still provide because we think it's good for the community in other ways.
I think I understand the question. Councilmember Johnson, what I would say is previously when you were with Henderson and you had a joint commission, and I looked back at the auditor's report for that from, I think it was 2016 when that auditor's report came in. Keep in mind that almost all your franchise fees, so that 40 grand was going to the commission, right? That was what was paying for that staff. Now you have that 40 grand, it's back in your general revenue fund. It's your discretion how you want to use that money. You could, as you suggest, take a portion of it and use it to pay for an employee, or you could do something else with it. You could buy fire trucks with it if you choose. It's unrestricted in that sense. Franchise fees can be used for anything, but plenty of cities look at it the way you just described and say, well, how about if I take 25% of that money or 50% of that money and I'll do this with it, the local programming, and I'll throw the rest in the fund. The variations on that are as many as there are different cities in the state. They all do a little bit different on it. The PEG fee is absolutely, though, tied to the PEG. You cannot use it for anything else. That 85 cents is locked in.
Okay, so really we can approve this contract and figure out what we're going to use the franchise money for later as far as budgeting and so forth. Is that?
And that's typically how it's done, is if you don't already have a plan, once you're comfortable from a policy standpoint in the contract, the decisions about, and those decisions may change, right? New elected officials may come in and say, we don't want to spend our money this way, we want to do it a different way. But the contract will always provide the funding mechanism, and then you will decide how you want to spend it.
Well, however we spend it, seems like we should have a rationale written down so that if they got a lot of turnover, at least they know how those decisions were made. That doesn't mean they can't change them, but at least they're not guessing at the original rationale.
I would suggest that they be separate. That if we approve the agreement, whatever we approve, then we could have a separate statement so they're not linked together. Because we have to, this is really an agreement with MediaCom.
Correct.
Okay. Brian, I do have a question about that. Frankly, I'll tell you what's going through my mind just to set the stage. I'm not particularly impressed with a 5% franchise fee because I think this is, without being unduly discriminatory, to use one of the pieces of language from the contract, it does affect people in a different way that receive basically the same service through satellite services. So I would for example, contemplate a 2 or 2.5% fee. And maybe even messing with the PEG fee, dollar amount, just as an example, okay? How hard would that be to, first of all, change as we would pass an ordinance? And if we do that, do you then have to go back to MediaCom, or are they okay if we reduce anything? Not increase it, but if we reduce either of those?
Couple of thoughts. If we do this, if that's the decision of the council, my recommendation to you would be to set it at 2.5%, but to include a clause that would say, at any time over the 10-year franchise term, the council has the right upon 90 days' notice to increase it back to
Thank you.
5%, in case
Yes.
something changes. Yes, I would have to go back to MediaCom, but I cannot believe that MediaCom wouldn't look at it and say, you mean I get to cut my fee in half for at least some period of time here? What possible answer could there be except, yes, I want to reduce the cost of the franchise? So I would be extraordinarily surprised, council member, if that's nothing more than 2 emails, a revision in 1 sentence, and then get it back to the city to process.
So what's your rationale for that? Because he already said that then that doesn't guarantee that's going to be savings to the customers if MediaCom raises its fee.
Well, they can always raise their fees even when we have a 5%. If we have a 5% franchise fee, they can raise their fees.
No, but what's your rationale for not going 5%?
Because I'm not sure that it's fair to our citizens, and I'm not sure that we should be in the business of simply saying we can get the most we can get. Okay? I realize it's a cut. My quick calculation is that, well, if you did 2.5%, it would be $20,000 less every year. If we're going to bring in $40,000 with a 5%,
Right.
obviously at 2.5%, we'd bring in about 20, assuming we keep customers and all of that. And we know they may go down, but as you indicated, they may raise the rates then if they have fewer customers. But I'm asking the question out loud to get understanding. All these questions, and I quickly would add, thank you, Brian, because we're trying to get a perspective on this that we can't get any other way. If we did this in a regular meeting, we're under time pressure. Here, we've completely covered the field, I think, of a lot of information, and now we have to make a decision. But I don't think we're here just to get the most we can get.
Yeah.
I understand it impacts the budget. I'm on the Personnel and Budget Committee, too.
Yeah.
But anyway.
To me, that makes it more complicated, because then now we got to start talking about what we're going to provide for how much, and how much is we just want to put in the general fund, and how much we want to put toward expenses, and that opens up another whole can of worms. If we just leave it at 5%, can't we always reduce it?
I disagree. I think that the agreement can be written so that we have the flexibility to cap at 5.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's something that this council can work out as far as the math. I don't think we have to tie up time right now to go ahead and figure out what that percentage is
Well,
going to be.
We set other things like this annually.
That's right.
We have a fee schedule.
There's no reason
We do.
why we can't have something set. 5 is the ultimate, but there's no reason why we can't have language in there that just says we reserve the right to be able to cap at 5 and adjust accordingly, lower if we need to.
Is that true?
And in the end, MediaCom doesn't care. MediaCom doesn't care because they're passing it along to the customer anyway. And so it's not like it's hurting them.
So let me try to answer. There was a couple of questions here. To your final point, though, they always care about any fee that's going to go on the bill, because the more expensive the fee, the bill gets, people are going to look at it and say, well, can I buy it cheaper through Apple TV or through something like that? So if they were sitting here, I know that that's what they would tell you in response, is we care about all these fees. Having said that, they've already agreed to this contract and said we will pay a 5% and we will pay 85 cents. So everything you guys are talking about of potentially dropping that, as you say, they're not going to disagree with a drop in the fee. Now, to your earlier question, Councilmember, can we set it up so that, or I forget who brought it up, but can we set it up so that we cap it at 5, which is where we're at now, and we have the ability to fluctuate? That's kind of a variation on this council member's point, which is started at a lower amount, whatever you agree upon. 2.5 was the floated proposal. And then that line that you want to make sure you include in there is but upon notice, the city has the unilateral right to increase it. I'm confident, it's still a better position for Mediacom because they're going to get the benefit of a lower rate if that's what you choose to do. So they're not going to disagree with that. What they're going to want to make sure of is that they get plenty of advance notice, because what they don't want is for fees to be changing every 3 or 6 months. They want to try to do it once a year, and people complain about that. People notice a 5-cent change in their bill. It bugs them. Why did that change? So they're going to be concerned about that, but I think if we pitched it this way, now, let me just make sure everybody understands. You have been at 5% since at least 2001. This would actually be, you could cast it as a reduction in the bill for the subscriber, right? You could say, hey, I did a nice job on this franchise, and I am lowering your franchise fee from 5% to 2.5% if that's what the council decides to do. So this isn't like we're talking about imposing a full 5%. You have been at 5% for a long time. This would be taking your customers down. I leave to you what a $20,000 hit to your budget does. I have no idea about that issue. That's for the council to decide, because as Jasper pointed out, this goes right into your general revenue fund. So, it's $20,000 less there. That just has to be figured out to make sure that the books balance with what you want to accomplish in the city. That's a bigger question than this contract.
See, my feeling with flexibility comes down to this, is that because we haven't approved anything yet, because we're sitting at 5%, which is where we've always been at, we also haven't had a proposal from city staff as to how they plan on doing what, and what that cost might be to be able to run. And we could find out that it's only going to cost $15,000 a year to be able to do. I don't know. We don't know that until city staff comes and says, here's what we're proposing that we're going to need. We're going to be using just hard drives. We're not going to be flipping over with CDs and burning CDs with the stuff. Programming is going to be easy to be able to run through simple programming stuff, which God knows there's plenty of that out there as far as software goes. It may be at a minimal for city staff to be able to run. I like the idea of having flexibility because I don't know what city staff's going to come back to us with.
To be clear, since 2001, the city's been paying us 5%, but they were not paying a PEG fee?
Mediacom was remitting a 5% fee, and correct, there was no PEG fee. There was just those lump sum payments of $20,000.
Okay.
And since 2016 or thereabouts, we have never, as a city, had to pay an employee to manage the system. The commission did that before, correct?
Yes.
And all those fees, I believe, the franchise fees at the time, under the joint powers agreement, went straight to the commission. So it wasn't even a stop it, go and collect $200. It went right past the city, right to the commission. They had their own revenue source based on what your residents were paying. Now that that's gone, I think that's where the challenge is for this council. Normally these questions are not as hard, but you're grappling with, geez, we used to have this cable commission do some of these things. Now, what do we want it to look like for the next 10 years? And that's why it's a harder issue for you folks.
In regards to the PEG fee, Brian, we say in language it's 85 cents. Can't it just be tied to a percentage instead of this 85 cents? Because as you mentioned earlier, the possibility of going from 700 customers down to 600 customers because people decide to go ahead and cut the cable. If you're looking at maintaining a certain amount of revenue, it seems to me that you'd want to have something tied to a percentage as opposed to a number.
100% agree, Mayor, and we worked hard on that issue. That was one that Mediacom was insistent that they wanted a per subscriber fee, and in the end, what we were mostly focused on was revenue generation in these negotiations, so we conceded that point, agreed to the 85 cents. That issue, we certainly can go back on, but that one will not be a 2-email issue. If we go back and try to say, convert it to a percentage of gross, we'll have we'll have some work to do.
Oh, yeah.
It'll open up some other issues.
And I know this question has really nothing to do with the legal side of this, but just something, maybe you have some technical expertise, not because you represent the cable industry and things of this nature. Speed tests. You mentioned earlier about the bundling and how, like in the Twin Cities, you'll see them maybe going from 40 meg or 40 gig to 100 gig for their broadband. That 100 gig, that's really not 100 gig, is it? I mean, that's on an ideal situation where you have very few people on the system at that particular time. If you were to run speedtest.net, you're certainly not going to be anywhere close to 100 gig. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think it's megahertz, but yes,
Yeah, you're correct, megahertz.
because that would be a lovely system if it was 100 gig.
Yeah, you're right.
Lightning fast. There's a lot of debate about which speed test you use. You know, when you're on Mediacom's system, usually the top of their browser will take you to their preferred speed test, which will give you their preferred,
Numbers.
higher end numbers. There are plenty of sites out there that if you run a Google and ask for, even Consumer Reports will give you a more neutral speed test that can give you a more accurate read on it, up and down, because that's more important for those tests. But there's notorious variability as well. What you run at 8 in the morning is going to look a lot different than when you go home tonight.
That's correct.
Because the way these systems work is just like a plumbing system. If all of you go home and take a shower tonight, eventually the water pressure is going to get lower because everybody in town's full throttle on the shower,
Number of people on the pipe.
right?
Yep.
And the same thing holds true as it relates to the utilization of broadband capacity. It drains off of a hub in each neighborhood. It gets slow when we're all using it at 8 o'clock at night.
Well, thank you for clarifying that for me.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, this is very complicated because as we bring this before us for a vote, if we start making amendments, there's a trickle-down effect for how things happen. I am frankly, at this point, thinking it would be good to have an annual assessment, that's not a good word perhaps, an annual evaluation of where the fee could be, but starting at 2.5, but indicating that we could go to 5. Okay, so that's the law. We can't go to more than 5. That's sort of what Councilmember Favalis was talking about. But if we start trying to do that on the fly at the next meeting, we're going to be in big trouble here. Is there a way we could have the simple amendments that doesn't strike me, looking through the document, that there'd be that many places where there'd have to be a change? Could we have that brought to us to have in front of us as a possibility at the next meeting? I'm in a little awkward position because we don't make decisions at a working session.
Sure.
But this could be a direction to staff to please have that accomplished. Go ahead, Jasper.
If I may, I think what I'm hearing is, in general, we want to have the flexibility to increase it to 5% if that's possible, but start off at 2.5% until we figure out if we want to allocate this, or say we're allocating this franchise fee to running cable access television, figuring out what those operation costs. The 2.5% starting off number would be kind of a stopgap to be able to start generating revenue. And then if we do have cable access television kick off again, and we figure out those costs and what the level of service will be, we can adjust the franchise fee annually, similar to with our government fee schedule adoption that happens in December. Now, I don't know what Mediacom's response will be for as far as timing goes for that. If they need 90 days, 120 days, Brian would negotiate that. So I think that's what I'm hearing. You want the flexibility and to be able to start off at 2.5%. I'm not sure what the timeline. It sounds like it could be fairly easy, but you never know until you make that
But it
contact.
also takes in consideration the additional 85 cents that our members
Correct.
are going to be paying.
Yeah, and again, that's a I'm not calling it so much a proposal as trying to be prepared for our next meeting. What the other council members ultimately want to do would be their decision. I've given an indication of what I would fashion that to be. I do have one other quick
Can
question.
I just, before we go to something else, I'm not on board with that. I mean, John was and Newell was, but we haven't really gotten a consensus yet. I think it should just be the opposite. We leave it at 5%, and then as we look into it and look at our expenses and what we're going to provide and so forth, we can always reduce it. Why would we want to increase it in the future before I'm and if we want to reduce it to 4% offset the 85 cents, fine, but I think we should keep it where it's at, then discuss what our needs are and how much expense we want to cover and how much the budget can afford, and then if there's room to reduce it, reduce it. But instead of giving away revenues before we even get started.
Well,
Councilmember Sullivan?
I'm in agreement with Dave 100%. I think this is something we've been paying currently for, and I'm a MediaCom customer. I'll be open about that. We've been paying this for years. I think we'd be doing a disservice to take a step backwards and go to 2.5% in 6 months from now and realize, hey, we're at a shortfall. Let's raise it back up. I think we'd hear a lot of flack on that. This is something we're currently paying. It's not an add-on.
But
So I'm in
you're
agreement.
not paying the 85 cents peg right now, though.
Allow me to
Understand
say, however, if you leave it as a council, if we leave it at 5%, we would still want the ability to be able to adjust it later,
Right.
which is not in here now.
Right, and that's I
Okay,
hadn't gotten to that point
That's what
yet.
this is all about.
Yeah.
And I'm in
not
agreement with
against the
that part of the
flexibility.
conversation. Just
I'm not against the flexibility, I'm just against I'd flip-flop the way you want to do it.
That's that's what we're here for, to make these decisions. I do have one other quick question before I forget. The legal fees that have been paid so far, and by the way, we've not incorporated anything in this discussion about the cost of our city attorney's fees for this, but let's not go there now. Have we, if I recall right, having looked at the expenditures every month, and today, by the way, we got a whole list of last year's, just something to keep you awake at night,
Yes.
okay? But we've been paying these bills as we go, so we don't owe that money now. We've paid it. We're not going to take a big hit for legal fees, although we've been paying them. So is that correct?
That is correct. We are up
Just to be
to date as far as invoicing goes, I believe. There might be one that hits on the 13th.
I'll tell you one of the things that bothers me with this, okay? It does bother me that a select few that are paying for MediaCom, okay, have those funds going into the general fund rather than going for giving them better service, okay? Those select few are paying for additional things that are in this town that other people aren't. And as far as I'm concerned, the flexibility on a franchise fee should be based on what level of service we're able to provide those people with that franchise, with that franchise fee. So if it means having somebody on staff, if it means the computer, the software, if it means the hardware that goes into it, if it means setting up something so people are going out on the spot to videotape a hockey game or one of the baseball games up the field, great. But that should be going back to those customers that are paying for that. We shouldn't, I have a hard time with them paying for it to fix a sidewalk.
John, if I may also, the fee here that's being paid, the franchise fee, may be part of not part of the PEG as capital, but it's also paying for the services to our schools, to our city hall. We have some so-called free benefits that are built in. Look at Appendix C. Okay, and the MediaCom people are the ones paying for those. No one else is paying for them. So,
Councilmember Sullivan?
So Jasper, this might be a question for you. We're talking right-of-ways. What kind of expenses do we have in regards to upkeep of right-of-ways?
It all depends on if they're fixing services, they pay for all those costs. It's just for them to access it, so.
But what kind of fees do we currently, obviously, we
Oh.
have right-of-ways that we own. What cost does that entail back to the city? I'm new, this is new to
Yep.
me, so I'm asking that question. I'm just curious.
Yeah, so we have a right-of-way permit that's based on linear feet of disturbance, and that's one aspect of it. So I would say, in general, we maybe get $2,500 to $5,000 worth of right-of-way fees, and those are essentially the street department staff going out, inspecting what they've done and making sure that it's to city spec. We also have, if they are putting in like a water service or a sewer service, we have a fee for that as well, where we're inspecting it to make sure that it meets city spec before they close up the hole.
So essentially, and where I'm going with this is essentially part of that 5% fee that we're charging as a franchise fee, MediaCom's charging as a franchise fee, could be used for maintenance to the right-of-way. What we're spending in staff time, whatever, to go out and inspect stuff, or potentially that's what it is. Obviously, we have one for the electric department as well, a franchise fee.
Correct, and the revenues generated from the MediaCom franchise fee can go to whatever we'd like, whatever we think we should budget those dollars for, we can have it budgeted for that. So if we want to invest in right of way, maybe curb, sidewalk repair, things like that, we have the flexibility to use that however we feel.
So essentially what I was getting at is there are costs that the city is incurring by having people using our right-of-ways that essentially could be offset with that
Yeah.
5%.
I have a timing question here. If we agree that we're gonna act on this at our next meeting, and we agree to put it in, we want direct staff to put in the flexibility language, where does the fee get set? Does it have to be set right then? If we have the flexibility up to 5%, do we set it right then, or does that happen at some future date, and annually we set it at that date?
Well, I think if we go down the option of having a 5% fee and having inserted into the agreement the flexibility to reduce that if we feel fit, I think that's just an amendment to the agreement that we would work with Brian to execute with MediaCom if we get to that point at some point in the future. I don't think until we know exactly what we're going to use it for, what we're going to justify using it for, I don't think we put a timeline on it. I think we leave it open. If anything, we add a clause to the agreement saying we have the flexibility to reduce it as we feel fit.
Let me suggest that that's a much better way than going back for legal services to renegotiate. Okay? Get it built in, it's automatic, it's administrative, and off we go.
So, Mayor, the sentence that I'll propose will be something like, city has the authority upon 90 days advance written notice to increase or decrease, and I'll probably put it in both the franchise fee section and the PEG fee section, this fee, so long as it does not exceed 5% level or the 85%, 85 cent level. So in other words, you could decrease it next year if you chose, but then I want that ability, of course, to increase it if times change 5 years from then and you want to go back up. They're going to care about advance notice so that they have a chance to get their accounting group figured out, and they're probably may come back and say, I really don't want you guys to be doing this every 6 months. They may ask for, can you limit it to 2 or 3 times during the course of the franchise term? And generally, I would say that doesn't seem unreasonable.
How about on an annual basis when we go ahead and revise our fee schedule for the city? Would that be appropriate?
We could certainly pursue that. Because I don't think we have any desire either to, what good does it do us to bounce that all over every single year? It's just inviting complaints for the council. So what they're going to be concerned about is if you don't set that till December, and then you're going to do, let's say, your notice and it becomes effective in March, they'll probably increase their rates January 1. So they would like it to coincide with when their rates are changed. That way it's one time,
Right.
Customer deals with it, and then they don't have to field a whole bunch of other phone calls when it changes again. That's, if I could anticipate their argument, that's what they'll be concerned about.
And I can add some context. We recently received a letter from MediaCom. They're required to alert us when they increase rates, and they're about 6 months advance from the beginning of the year. So I believe it was the end of June, we got a letter saying, talking about what their increases were for the various packages. I would think they would want it to correspond with that so they can have it all be in one document and it's all out there for the public. So it might be something where we almost have to do it a year in advance, if that's the timeline. So if we do it in December during the budget process, it wouldn't take an effect until the next year or something of that nature. But I'm guessing that they're going to want a lot of lead time because they already provide that to the customers here.
Unless it's a decrease, in which case I imagine they'll get it over pretty quick.
Yeah.
Is there any other questions for Brian tonight? Anybody? Well, on behalf of the city of Sueur and our city council, thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate it. Thank you, council members.
And with that said, does anybody have anything regarding comments or miscellaneous, even though it's a work session? Anybody have anything to bring up at this point? If not, I'll go ahead and entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you again, Brian.